Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome USGLC. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome USGLC President and CEO, Liz Schreier.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to see all of you here, and welcome to our 2025 Impact Forum. So a few weeks ago, I took a little bit of break from all of this, and I went to celebrate my youngest granddaughter's 2nd birthday. Now, as the grandma, you just go along for the ride. So off we went to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, to Dollywood. Now, I happen to love Dolly Parton. You know, someone who grew up one of 11 siblings with not much resources, but a lot of love and a lot of faith, who literally gives back to America and to the world, is my kind of superstar. So I get there, and it was really a calming experience after, a few months to go to the kiddie rides, which are full of either bees or ducks or pigs that play a lot of music, and they just go round and round in a circle. It was great. Until then, I saw it. One of the country's largest wooden roller coasters that goes up 20 stories, apparently, with a drop of 165 feet that goes 75 miles an hour. Apparently, it was a stunning metaphor for our community over the last 4 months. Going up and down, round and round, swirling at a speed that is out of control. So let's just say I am not a fan of roller coasters, and my heart started to race. I pined for the days when the first executive order came out that called for a review of foreign assistance, a review that brought me back to that calmness of the kiddie rides. USGLC at that time immediately came out and welcomed the executive review of foreign assistance and said we would welcome the opportunity to engage with the new administration and Congress. It felt, after all, anyone who is serious about international assistance and diplomacy should be serious about a reform. What followed afterwards was more like that roller coaster. You know, during Secretary Rubio's confirmation, I remember when he talked about and outlined what the markers were for America's development and international assistance, saying it needed to make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. He was right then, and he's right now. The question is how we get there. You know, earlier this year, I was watching another congressional hearing, and it was when the U.S. intelligence community released its annual threat assessment. Now, I saw the unclassified version, so I can only imagine what the classified version was all about, but it sounded an alarm about how America's rivals, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, are challenging U.S. interests everywhere around the world. So let's face it, for America to win in the world, we need to double down on peace through strength foreign policy and start playing offense and defense. And as we'll discuss later today, that means a budget proposal that tries to cut 85% from our footprint around the world is not how America wins in the world. The stakes are simply too high. On the national security front, our combatant commanders are weighing in. The Indo-Pacific combatant commander testified just on Capitol Hill recently, and he talked about U.S. aid programs, saying that they're, quote, critical, enabling us to compete against the Republic of China. The fact is, we've zeroed out our aid programs in places like the Pacific Islands, where we literally are competing against China. On the humanitarian and global health front, we are seeking we are seeing the impact of cutting programs like PEPFAR that have saved 26 million lives. Yet we just canceled a program that monitors bird flu at a time where we're seeing devastating impacts on U.S. livestock, on impacting egg prices in the grocery store, and God forbid, the welfare of our citizens. You know, at the end of the day, the stakes are highest on our economic interests. And we certainly don't want to cut back on programs that undermine what works, like a program called the Libido Quarter Project, where international assistance literally is a win-win for collaborating with our African partners, creating jobs here, and again, competing effectively against China. So the stakes are high, but I'll tell you what's working. What's working is all of you who are here showing up, and speaking out. Do you know that more than 600,000 Americans have called their Congress to tell the stories? Over 600, yep. Over 600 congressional in-district meetings have taken place. Over the April congressional recess, I traveled to many of your hometowns. Now, this is a time when constituent town hall meetings have not been, with members of Congress, have not been so popular. But USGLC is so proud that we have hosted town hall meetings with members of Congress all over the country. I personally was honored to moderate conversations with many Republican senators in your hometowns. I was with Senator James Lankford in Oklahoma City. I was with Senator Mike Rounds in Mitchell, South Dakota, and with Senator John Curtis in Utah, with nearly Salt Lake City, Utah, with nearly 700 of his constituents. Local farmers and veterans and business leaders and mayors showed up to talk about how their communities win in the world. At hearings back here in Washington, members are talking about the importance of international assistance. Senators Cornyn and Cassidy and Collins talked back about their concerns of pulling back on our global health programs like PEPFAR. Senators Moran and Bozeman, I heard talk about the importance and the imperative of investments in food security. Senator Graham from South Carolina, he said, quote, if we eliminate some of the programs that create stability over there, that chaos will certainly come here. Look, no taxpayer deserves programs that are wasteful. It's why USGLC is proud to have put out a blueprint for how America wins in the world. It's 10 practical ideas about how we strengthen international assistance. We've already received fabulous feedback from both sides of the aisle. They're practical ideas like one brand when we provide assistance with an American flag and a tagline that says, from the American people. We talk about ensuring that when we provide assistance, we use what's called a negotiated compact model. It was a Republican administration that first started that, where recipient countries, they should have skin in the game too, so that they're investing with their own citizens right along with us. We call for prioritizing humanitarian and global health programs, not just because it's the right thing to do, which it is, but also because it's the smart thing to do, because the conflict of the day today becomes the threat of tomorrow. It's not going to surprise you that several of our ideas are about the blueprint, and the blueprint are about the economy. You know, this afternoon, just in the moment, we're going to release, and we're excited about spotlighting economic ideas. And we're going to spotlight with an economic lens, with a fresh new look, and launch a new report, the Economic Security is National Security Report. And I'm excited for you to hear about it, to read it, and to see it. So, my friends, we have a lot of work to do to tell our story, to tell your story. And it's a great story to tell about how these programs make a difference in our world and for America. So I thank you. I thank you for being on our shared roller coaster, and I know it's worth it. Because as Dolly Parton once said, the way I see it, if you want the rainbow, you gotta put up with the rain. So thank you for joining us. So let's get started with our storytelling. Please welcome Eero Argiro, who is the Director of Public Policy for the Americas at Amazon.
Hi, everyone. You can hear me now. Thank you so much, Liz. That was a great analogy, and the roller coaster story was my favorite. And I just want to thank everyone, Liz and everyone at USGLC, for convening this event and featuring the issue of economic security so prominently on the agenda. I am especially excited to be here today during the launch of USGLC's much anticipated economic security report, which Chris Clement will present shortly. To help set the stage for this session, I want to focus briefly on the topic of U.S. technology leadership. Given today's rapidly evolving technological advancements and shifting geopolitical landscapes, maintaining America's technological edge globally is more important than ever. American-led digital innovation, including the development and use of artificial intelligence, is a core and critical extension of U.S. economic and national security. It is fundamental to our ability to counter foreign threats and defend both American interests and values and those of our allies around the world. The U.S. has long been home to the most innovative companies in the world, and our economic and national security interests are best served by policies that enhance technological dynamism and open markets. And this is an issue that moves well beyond U.S. borders, as U.S. companies vigorously compete with technological competitors around the world. We need a pro-innovation policy environment and a level playing field. When governments, including some of our closest allies and partners, move to tilt the playing field away from U.S. companies, it significantly reduces our collective technological competitiveness and economic security goals. As USGLC's economic security report highlights, maintaining America's edge will require decisive action to support American companies, open markets, and shape global standards. I'm excited about the group of outstanding experts we have assembled here today who will dive deeper into these issues surrounding economic security. After Chris Clement discusses the report, our first panel will feature General Keith Alexander, former commander of the U.S. Cyber Command, director of the NSA, and CEO of IronNet. He is also a member of USGLC's National Security Advisory Council. Second, General Laura Richardson, former commander of Southcom and U.S. Army North. She is the co-chair of USGLC's National Security Advisory Council. And Representative Young Kim, who proudly represents California's 40th District and serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. For the second panel, we'll hear from Brian Kavanaugh, Associate Director of Homeland Security at the Office of Management and Budget. Brian previously was Senior Vice President at American Global Strategies, and before that served at the NSC as Senior Director for Resilience. Chris Clement, USGLC Senior Fellow for Economic Security. Chris served for 12 years in the U.S. government across the Export-Import Bank, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and the U.S. Department of Transportation. And last, but certainly not least, John Murphy, Senior Vice President and Head of International at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where he represents the organization before Congress, the administration, and foreign governments. And we're pleased to have Liz Schreier moderate our two stellar conversations. With that, I'll hand it over to Chris. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eero. Hi, everybody. Once again, I'm Chris Clement. I'm a senior fellow here at USGLC working on economic security. And we're super excited to be launching our big report with you today. So you're probably wondering, where can you find it? Well, if you grab your program, which everyone should have, you shouldn't have lost it yet, and you go on the back, there's a QR code. And everyone should know how this works. You sort of look at that, and it'll take you directly to the web link for the report. So the reason we've undertaken this work and launched USGLC's Global Economic Hub is that we so clearly see the challenges facing American influence and leadership throughout the world. We are grateful to the dozens of stakeholders, including USGLC business members, national security experts, and policy partners in and outside of government who contributed critical input and to deepen our analysis and understanding of these critical issues. As Liz shared, America's rivals, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, increasingly coordinate with one another to challenge America's global economic influence, and that threatens our economic and national security here at home. These threats have been accumulating for decades, but today they are growing and accelerating, and they pose a clear and direct threat to U.S. national security. In fact, these 21st century threats are more complicated and multifaceted than anything we've faced before as a nation. Unlike the Cold War, when the U.S. led and Soviet-led bounded international orders were separate and distinct spheres of influence, today the U.S., China, and Russia are all playing in the same sandbox and the same global economy, and partner countries are hedging their bets. We're going to get into the discussion with Liz and our special guests in just a moment, but let me first share a few quick takeaways from the report. First, it's pretty straightforward. It's all in the title. Economic security is national security. The key is to understand that America's economic security and national security are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. They are one and the same. Next, securing America's place in the world as the leading economy is a foundation of our national power and key to advancing U.S. interests globally. This means actively leveraging our diplomatic capabilities at the State Department to shape an economic environment where American businesses and workers can compete, innovate, and win on the global stage and throughout all global markets. And this means the U.S. government needs to find more ways to partner with the U.S. private sector internationally to strengthen U.S. economic security. Third, America needs an economic security playbook that is integrated with U.S. national security goals, and we need to use all of America's economic security tools to win. Defensive economic security measures alone are not enough to win the 21st century competition for global influence. Sanctions, export controls, tariffs, investment restrictions cannot by themselves draw other nations into America's sphere of influence. Offensive economic security capacity is needed to interact with the world and the global economy in a way that is both more positive and more durable. We hope you will dig into the report. Please give us all your feedback. We're really interested to hear that. We look forward to the conversation and opportunity ahead to move this critical agenda forward. And with that, it's my pleasure to invite Liz back up here on stage along with our distinguished panelists. So thank you very much.
Welcome. So I hit the jackpot with this group. So this is what it looks like. So read the whole thing. Okay, thank you. This is a phenomenal group. So thank you, General, Congresswoman, to be here. Thank you, Chris and Arrow. We're going to jump right in. And I think I want to start for trying to bring to life this concept of economic security is national security, and how these two themes come together. And General Alexander, I'm going to start with you because you have spent your career dedicated to defending our country and keeping us safe in new and emerging threats. And so I want you to help us understand the why. Why is the idea of economic security so relevant, so urgent right now? Help us understand the link from your perspective, given what you have done in terms of your leadership. You're one of the most profound leaders in national security and technology. So help us link economic security as national security. Welcome.
Did you get that recorded for
Yes,
for
tell
my
your
mother?
children that I said
Okay.
it right here.
Yeah, okay. Well, first off, when I look at this from a national security perspective, what is the levers that the President and the National Security Council has to go against our adversaries?
Everybody can hear? Okay, okay, good.
Can you hear me? Well, at least
Yep.
in the first row.
Okay.
And so when you look at it, in the past it's been the military. The problem with that is, as we go forward in the future contrast, it can't be just the military. What are the other elements of national power? There's diplomacy, there's others. But the one that I think has been missing is our economic power, our financial power. When you think about that, this is a lever that the President has and the National Security Council that can get us, all our friends and allies, on one side where we can now compete against the autocratic states, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And we have to approach that with a game plan. And I think the publication that you've put out helps set that framework for where we need to go.
I'm going to pick up on what you just said, and General Richardson, I want to ask you, I mentioned in my opening about this annual threat assessment that we heard about earlier this year. One of the things that struck me about it is it said the following, and you and I have talked quite a bit about it. It talked about, as General Alexander just said, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, individually and collectively, are challenging U.S. interests in the world and promoting alternative systems to compete with the United States, primarily in trade, finance, and security. So I expected the security. What was striking to me is the focus on trade and finance. So one of the items in the report said that you can't win on military alone. From your experience, when you think about these growing threats, you probably were not surprised that it said finance and trade. So help us understand the link from your perspective of where development, international assistance, diplomacy fits in from how we're dealing with these growing threats of our rivals.
So thank you, Liz. And as a combatant commander, the geographic area that I had as a U.S. Southern Command commander for 3 years was Latin America, so South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. And what I found as I traveled around this region, just the desperation for investment in the countries. And because of the impacts, the GDP impacts of COVID that impacted anywhere from 8.5% GDP decrease to 18.5%, depending on which country, they were desperate for that. We have a lot of US companies in the region, in Latin America and the Caribbean. Liz mentioned it earlier in her opening comments, just the fact of our branding. How are we branding and showing that we have a flag on pallets of aid or things that are coming into the countries because the country's leaders do not see it. I would say that for Team USA, our instruments of national power, diplomacy, information, military, and economics, I use the acronym DIME, are so very, very important. And on the military side, hard power and soft power, that's what we were able to bring to the table. But in that region, the hard power wasn't the predominant thing, it was the soft power. How are we helping countries move the needle? How are we helping them with their security challenges internally? And I think that just bringing those instruments of national power together as what I call the axis of aggressors, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, as they are working together. They have not been working together before until now. And so we have the global strategic competition. We have to get after it. We have to be on the field. We've got to have our jersey on from Team USA with our number. And we got to have a good ground game in terms of working with the countries in the globe.
Thank you on that. Congresswoman, there are a number of suggestions in this report that speak directly to policymakers. And I want to pick up on one of them on this exact question of how economic security is national security. And it calls for injecting economics into American diplomacy and State Department. Now, I know that rings true to you because you've been singing from the song sheet for a long time. Most recently at a hearing where you made it very clear, saying that America's focus on economic statecraft has eroded over the years. You recently said you've been calling that out for that we've been splitting economic statecraft from our democracy and how foolish that has been. Couldn't agree with you more. So talk about this whole dynamic that we're making a mistake by not connecting the dots around these two important elements of power.
Sure. Liz, first of all, thank you for having me, and I want to congratulate USGLC for releasing this report focused on economic security is national security, and as you noted, my subcommittee on East Asia and the Pacific, which I chair, just had a hearing to highlight this issue, right? It's not easy changing the status quo, and our economic statecraft regime has been inconsistent, incoherent, or even split between more than a dozen different agencies, and much of those agencies have overlapping responsibilities. Over the decades, as you know, the State Department functions and authorities have been either stripped off, or if they were consolidated or taken over by, or observed by other agencies that traditionally focus on domestic issues, right? So we need to ask ourselves right now, how can the United States government be best positioned to help American businesses gain more market access and protect them from the predatory foreign influence and competition? So the State Department, I believe, needs to lead in this area, and that is what the House Foreign Affairs Committee is focused on. And for the first time in more than 2 decades, Congress is going to reauthorize the State Department, and the subcommittee that I chair, we have a authority to oversee the E family within the State Department and also the USGLC, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. So I think that through those hearings, we've identified and assessed the best opportunities on how we can seriously assess what are some of the ways that we can effectively look at what the reforms will look like. And I think Congress is stepping in that field. So.
I love that.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, the E family is all the economic bureaus within the State
Economic,
Department.
energy,
So
environment, yes.
Economic, right, energy, environment. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to come back and ask you a little bit more about this. But all right, so given that, what I want to do is help make this real for our audience by looking at a couple specific arenas. And there's some incredible expertise on this stage. So I'm going to pick some expertise for each of you. Indo-Pacific, Western Hemisphere, and technology. So General Alexander, on our stage at these forums in the past, one of the things some of you who have been to these forums in the past may remember, we've highlighted some of these positive advancements that technology has done in the world. And we've actually brought together conversations about how development and technology have done great things in the world. There's also some threats with technology. So I don't want you to keep us up at night with too many fears, but I do want you to share some of the reasons why we have to focus on some of the threats so that we get this right. I know you know quite a bit about quantum and 5G and the communications infrastructure that we have to worry about out there. So as we think about the issues, help us show why U.S. government leadership is so important on the economic security and national security through the tech lens to make this conversation a little bit more real. And then I want to talk about some of the regional areas. But help us with technology. Start there.
So, first, we're an innovation nation, and
Yep.
there's a lot of books out on that. Perhaps more importantly, we create tremendous capabilities, and you look at what's going on. The thing that struck me when I was at NSA was the fact that somebody would create something, Huawei would steal it. The theft of intellectual property and the gain that China has made over the last 20 years has been the equivalent of over $10 trillion.
Ooh.
And when you think about that, that made the 5G competition way in their favor. We scrambled in 2018 to catch up with a 5G strategy. We're going into 6G and we're going into AI. When you look at the technology, though, that's a place where first place gets 10 times as much as second place. We can't be in second place in some of these areas, especially when we create it. So this part of our economic security is actually protecting that technology, which China is stealing from us today. And I think if you want to be scared, look at what's going on with respect to their use of some of the cyber tools to put our critical infrastructure at risk if they were to go after Taiwan, which Xi Jinping has said he would do by 2027. Think about that. And right now they have the advantage. They're in our infrastructure. We're at a war in this area. Our economic and our national security are at risk. And they're stealing us blind. And we need to push back on that. We really do. And it does more than just hurts that. It hurts us globally in our competition.
So this is going to come up in probably both of your answers. So let's drill down. You oversaw as combatant commander in Southcom, Latin America and the Caribbean. We're seeing China, I think it's 23 out of 33 countries in your region that are now part of the Belt Road Initiative. Talk to us, make it real, about how you take economic security and national security in just one region, a big one, an important one. It mattered that we are playing a role with the toolkits of our economic security, particularly around our international assistance, our diplomacy. What do you see, and what are you seeing going forward?
And so, excuse me, in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative with China, 22 of 31 countries signed on to this Belt and Road Initiative, Colombia being the latest country to do so.
An important ally of ours.
Just within this past month. And so what does the Belt and Road Initiative mean? It is billions of dollars of projects generally in these Belt and Road Initiatives. The thing is that there's a lot of strings attached on all of these things. Predatory loans, the projects taking a really long time to get done, economic hazards associated with them. The thing about the Belt and Road Initiative is China brings in their own labor workers. They don't invest in the country and create jobs for the, the host country where the projects are being put in. But in terms of the military perspective, the critical infrastructure, deep water ports, 5G, safe city, smart city technology. I had the most space enabling infrastructure by the Chinese in this region. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why is it the critical infrastructure? And from a military perspective, I worry about the flipping, the dual use capability of using it for military application. And I see it's under the guise of this economic investment in the countries when really I see it and saw it as extraction, not investment. And so how do we compete with that? How do we brand Team USA? How do we brand Team Democracy? And talk about what US quality investment brings. And so that was the catalyst really for reaching out and partnering with the Department of Commerce, Department of Treasury, American Chamber of Commerce, Exim Bank, Developmental Finance Corporation, to get more strategic projects. How do we get more? How do we get more investment? How do we show that what Team USA is actually in our own hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, in which we live, helping to make everybody safer, stronger, and more prosperous.
And give an example, you gave me an example of what happens when we don't have an ambassador on the ground in a place like Panama.
Yeah, Panama. So 5 years without a U.S. ambassador. So I go back to the acronym DIME, diplomacy. And you know, the way that countries look at our U.S. ambassadors is that's their representative to our U.S. president. You know, we always look at it the other way, that, you know, that's our ambassador on the ground, our ground game for Team USA, which is absolutely true. But when a president from a country doesn't have the #1 diplomat in the seat, and there's 5-year gaps, 3-year gaps for, we're going on 3 years with Colombia, no U.S. ambassador. Chile was 3 years. Brazil was 3 years. These are major, big countries that we care about. But if we really cared, why don't we have our #1 diplomat there?
So another easy region, the Indo-Pacific region. You mentioned you oversee the key subcommittee, the East Asia Pacific subcommittee. You've called the Indo-Pacific a top U.S. market, vital to the strength of the U.S. economy. You push both Democrat and Republican administrations to take a more active role. You've traveled extensively throughout the region. I've clocked in that you've been to South Korea, Singapore, Philippines, Australia, Indonesia, Thailand, Taiwan, the list goes on. And I know you've been there because this is a $2 trillion trading that we have with the Indo-Pacific just last year. This is an extraordinary, important part of the world. What are you seeing? How important is it for us to get our act in gear and to use the same set of tools that I was asking General Richardson?
It is so important. The Indo-Pacific is a critical region, and there's tremendous economic prosperity if we do this right and do the commercial and economic engagement properly. Look, you know, when I travel abroad, I routinely meet with our foreign commercial service officers at the embassy, and you know, I get to see what they're doing on the ground. But oftentimes, they tell us in our delegation that they attend trade shows, they help to coordinate these events on the ground, but they also admit that those activities that they are doing are not directly related to helping our American businesses to gain market access, for example. And they are oftentimes siloed from the State Department's diplomatic tools. So because of that, they are not able to fully utilize the diplomatic toolkit. So I think that's where we need to really take a look at, and how we can leverage our diplomatic toolkit. Bring them back, for example, as we are looking at the state authorization, we have tremendous opportunity to bring back FCS, FAS back into the State Department and give them the diplomatic opportunity and the toolkit to be utilized. And the most important thing is, again, we need to look out for our American economic interest. And if we can bring that together and then give the FCS and FAS and our officers on the ground, I believe we will be able to utilize the tremendous economic opportunity that's out there in the Indo-Pacific.
So picking up on that, I want to hear from you. So you're hearing some real examples of what the tagline of this report is "use it or lose it," and how we advance our economic interests. So I want to talk about what we need to do to get it right. So I want to hear from you, and I want to ask each of you a question about what you would kind of bet on. So General Richardson, you and I have spent some time on the Hill together, and one of the things that we've talked about when people I know policymakers ask you about, and you've talked about, is China has overtaken us as more embassies and consulates around the world, and they are increasing their diplomatic budget. So when you think about what we need to do to get right, what we should be investing in, whether it's our embassies, our international assistance tools, what would you, if you could wave your wand, what would you be investing in to get right to address the problems that we're talking about today?
So I would say in the global strategic competition that's going on, we don't need to outspend our adversaries to outcompete them. The thing is that we have to be consistent in our approach, and we have to know, countries got to know that we're going to be there. That it's not going to be, they have to hedge because they're not sure if the United States is actually going to be there to support them. And so in terms of what I like in this report is that instead of just having ad hoc things, with the economic officers in our embassies and the commerce officers, and in 22 of the 31 countries, I have security cooperation, or the DoD has security cooperation offices, military, that's embedded working for the ambassador and also the combatant commander together to try and move that country team, the ground game for Team USA together. And so instead of having to go look for Team USA partnerships as part of the instruments of national power, that we have an economic security strategy along with that national security strategy, because those have implications for each other. As you move out on an economic security strategy, there are implications to the national security strategy. So you have to consider both. And I will tell you that if we can get our strategies aligned, those two, national security and economic, with the embassies and our ground game, it just makes America safer, it makes us stronger, it makes us more prosperous, but also our allies and partners more prosperous as well.
So one follow-up question for that. Are you concerned right now, looking ahead, if we have the resources and the capacity to have that economic team on the ground, given what we're looking at in terms of having the international assistance, having the capacity, and having the people on the ground? You had some of that in your tenure as combatant commanders. Looking ahead, what do you think?
I think that we need to double down, and we need to move out, and we need to do it aggressively. Things don't happen, things happen so incredibly slow, like watching paint dry. And I think that, you have to be working each and every day. Our adversaries, they're trying to replace Team USA in the world-based international order. We should be really, really concerned about that. And I will tell you that the tit for tat, every little gain that we made for Team USA in our region, our adversaries were trying to double down. I mean, they wake up every day trying to beat us on the field, every single day. And so if we don't have that mentality in terms of just American leadership, because countries want to work with us, it's the fact of, are we consistent? Are we there? Are we saying what we really mean? And are we putting our economic resources as part of the team, not just for ourselves, but for Team USA, for team democracy?
Yeah. So, Congresswoman, let me ask you the similar question. You've got a couple bills already up on that you're working on. What do we need to invest in terms of, you've got several bills that you're looking at from your committee to try to invest in it. How concerned are you about the resources, the capacity to do what you've been talking about to make sure that we get this right?
Let me first tell you, when I travel abroad in all the regions that you mentioned, especially in the Indo-Pacific area, the one common theme that I hear is that our partners want to look at the United States as a partner of choice, but they also are concerned that we're not there, we're not showing up. And when we're not there, they tell us China is stepping in. China is always looking for an opportunity to replace US leadership. And we are seeing that right now. The US foreign assistance, for example, has long been a powerful soft soft power that it really helped our U.S. leadership on the world stage. But right now, we're seeing that eroding. If we are not there, we cannot build trust with our allies. That's what they want us to come and help them. Also promote democracy, stabilize the terrorism-prone regions, and also help American businesses gain the market access. We're not there. Obviously, over time, unfortunately, there have been some serious and credible cases of wasteful and unproductive programs that has been occurring on this, our spending abroad, that really undermine the effective and the targeted programs that we've been promoting. And so this is where I'm really concerned. Early on, in the last few months, we've seen the USAID programs being cut, eliminated, merged with the State Department, USAGM. These are areas where we are ceding the information space or ceding our soft power to our adversaries like China. I'm concerned about those things. So I think
so are we.
We are, all of us are, I'm sure. So I'm going to continue to speak out on why it is so important so that we can be targeted, measured, effective in our foreign assistance programs. And you mentioned the couple of legislation that I've introduced, and I'm trying to get this across the finish line. And we earlier talked about our Taiwan. Why is Taiwan so important? We already know, as General Richardson mentioned, we know Xi Jinping is very ambitious. The deadline that he imposed is 2027. It's coming up around the corner. Yeah. If China invades Taiwan, look, the global economy will be disrupted. And some analysts predict that it will cost about global economy of $10 trillion. And this is serious. And which is the reason why we need to focus on making sure that we do one of the things that we can do is actually increase and strengthen our U.S.-Taiwan economic and trade relations. And one of the ways that I'm trying to do is by introducing the bill that I'm working on, which is Taiwan Travel Tourism Coordination Act. We're trying to look at the economic cooperation in travel and tourism spaces, and I think we can do that. Another way is to ensure that Taiwan, their status is elevated in the international organizations and on the world global stage. I've been long advocate of Taiwan's membership in organizations like WHO, but the legislation that I'm pushing for is the Taiwan Non-Discrimination Act. Taiwan is the 7th largest trading partner with the United States. It deserves to have a seat at the table, especially IMF, and that's what my Taiwan Non-Discrimination Act will do.
Well, thank you for your leadership. I visited Taiwan about a year ago, and you certainly can see the importance of the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. So thank you for that. Thank you for your support of foreign assistance and your work on that as well.
Yeah, we should recognize, thank you. And there's also, I've been hearing from our Taiwanese officials when I travel there, the U.S.-Taiwan Initiative for 21st Century is really an encouraging initiative that will help us with building a stronger trade and economic relations with Taiwan. But we got a lot of work to do. But I was very encouraged to see TSMC investing $100 billion more in the United States. And that's the kind of thing that we want to encourage more of with our partners and allies in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, these are the kinds of things that are working. Let me pick up on one more I think we have time for. And General Alexander, I think this fits into what both General Richardson and Congressman Kim are talking about. And that's the issue of critical minerals. You have talked about the need of a strategy or maybe even a campaign plan to ensure America advances our security, our economic interests. And I think that's what you're both describing, is that we are not using all of the tools as well as we need to be using. And I think about, I mentioned very briefly, it's not something everybody's familiar with, but it's one example of getting it right. It's a project called the Libido Corridor. It's in Africa, where we have kind of built this infrastructure between Angola and Zambia and the DRC to help create a supply chain of moving critical minerals so that we have good Africa partners. We're creating jobs. We're competing with China in a smart way. Talk about what's really at stake with these critical minerals and how we can use this toolkit that your colleagues on the panelists are describing. What's at stake for us?
So on the critical minerals, one of the things that General Richardson brought out is when China goes in, they suck out what they need and they don't help the economy. We need a plan of how we're going to operate in countries to go forward in strategic metals, in all these other areas. We can't just say, we're going to go build an economy. We have to have a plan between the public and private sector. In the minerals, here's how that plan works. We need a plant to process critical minerals here in the US. They're building one.
That's it.
We need to partner with other countries on buying up some of these mineral resources that are out there. Right now, the majority of that is owned by China. We need to get in that game. We need to work with other countries, like Saudi Arabia, for example, buy up some of those and get back in this game. Why is cobalt so important? It's not just for AI and electric vehicles. It's also for weapon systems. It's important for that. And who do we have to go to for that? China. Think about that. That's crazy. We need to get ahead of this. And so a campaign plan is what we need in each of these areas. What's Commerce going to do? What's Treasury going to do? What's the White House going to do? And what's the private sector going to do? And lay that out in a strategic plan for each of these key areas and show how we will get ahead. I think what President Trump did in Saudi Arabia was a big jump. We should do it in Europe. We should do it in Asia. We should do it in South America. If we put our efforts into that and created campaign plans with each of those countries and told them how they would prosper and how we would prosper, this would be a win-win.
All right, on that win-win, I'm going to end with, I love that. You may have answered my last question, but in our last minute and a half, you'll each get 30 seconds maybe to answer this, be like being on your TV interview. I want to invite you all back here maybe a year, maybe I'll give you 2 years so you can give it enough runway. What's one example of what a win would be if we get economic security as national security right? What would it doesn't have to be that, it could be just one example of how you would see we got it.
A strategic plan with Europe on how we're going to go after things like AI and work with them and keep China from pushing us out.
Okay, I like that one. General Richardson?
U.S. companies competing on critical infrastructure around the globe.
Great.
And utilize DFC as a
Development
powerful
Finance
tool.
Corporation.
Yes,
Yep,
yes,
I like that.
Yes, to make sure that we are competing and staying strong on the world stage. Economic security is national security.
I love that. Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank General Alexander, General Richardson, and Congressman Young Kim.
Great.
It was fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to say thank you to this, and I'm going to bring on another panel that is going to continue to bring some richness to this conversation. Thank you all. They were wonderful. And please welcome back Chris Clemens, John, from our senior fellow, John Murphy from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Brian Kavanaugh from the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, in the White House. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Hi.
It's good to see you again,
Good
Liz.
to see you, Brian. Good to see you, John. Welcome back. So we're going to dig a little deeper into this conversation. I I won't tell any war stories of Brian and I in Africa, I promise you that. But Brian, I'm going to start with you. I really appreciate you taking a few minutes of your time away from what I'm gathering is a little busy time at the White House.
It's always busy.
It is, it is. All right, so I'm going to dig in on some of the details of what's in what Chris announced is in this detail. That was a great conversation we just had. But here's what I want to ask you. I want to talk about this, what I mentioned about playing offense and defense on our economic security portfolio. There's a lot of talk about tariffs because there's a lot of talk about how we need to, in this report, when we were planning it, we heard a lot about, yeah, we need to be using our defense strategy, sanctions, exports, tariffs. And people are interested in that. But more and more, you and I have talked about it, there's also real energy about having an offensive economic strategy. And so I'd love your thoughts from your perspective, sitting at OMB, sitting in the White House, of how we make sure we have an offensive economic strategy with things like international assistance, aggressive diplomacy. I don't know how much you heard of the last part of the conversation, but that was a lot about our offensive strategy. What do you think about that?
I think the last panel made a lot of really good points. I think when you go back to January 20th and coming into office with President Trump the second time around, there was a need to kind of level set where we were. The president likes to work top down on negotiations, so there was some table setting before you can get to a place where you're going to start having effective negotiations. I know the general mentioned Saudi Arabia as an example of a large effort that could be replicated throughout the world. We didn't get there just because the president took office on January 20th. There's a lot of things that had to happen in the lead up to that to set the table. And I think when you look at it and people talk about defensive versus offensive posturing, really at the end of the day, there's this great reset happening on trade. And I think the reciprocal tariffs were kind of an acknowledgement that not all are equal in terms of how countries treat each other with trade. When you get to that perspective and you can have those conversations, and it takes a lot of courage to do what we did with the tariffs. That's not something that's easy and it's high risk. But by doing that, we've set the stage to be able to go have these additional conversations with countries and work from a position where we're sitting at the table with equal footing. That wasn't happening before. So now that we've got the defensive side of the table set nice and neat, I think we're in a position where we can start doing the second half of the USAID or foreign assistance lift. And last time we spoke, we were living what that looked like in real time. And where we're at today, I feel that the State Department and the Office of Management and Budget have a very clear understanding of where our outlays were, where they want to be in the future. And now we're going through a very deliberative process with the White House to determine which direction we want to push and pull based on how the conversations are going at the various tables. I'm very fortunate to work with a very talented team, Jamison Greer, Kevin Hassett, Scott Besant, Howard Lutnick. These are big names. They are all very capable, and now that they have a good starting point, they can go have conversations. And through the nexus of economic security, which I really like on this report, is looking at national security through the economic security, is we can start having these meaningful conversations with not just countries, but industry around the world on how we want to approach what that economic offensive posture looks like.
So let me pick up on that. And John, you are at the Chamber of Commerce, so you know something about economic security. The president, I want to pick up on Brian's point. President goes out on his first trip. It wasn't his first trip. He obviously went to the funeral of the Pope, but his first foreign policy diplomatic trip to Saudi Arabia, to the Middle East. And he did it very differently, obviously, than most presidents that are usually around a national security lens. Does it around an economic lens. And makes a lot of deals and focuses on the economy. And so I want your sense from a private sector point of view, which you represent, about how we make sure we get economic statecraft right. How doing global engagement on a statecraft level matters to our economy here, and what we should be doing. You know, bringing business leaders on planes, on showing up at economic forums, of using our international assistance toolkit right. What is the right level of economic statecraft?
Well, Liz, thank you for that question. It's great to be here with USGLC and see so many old friends here. I think economic statecraft to be successful takes at least two ingredients, and one is working closely with the business community. Of course, I would say that, coming from the Chamber of Commerce, but also working with our friends and allies and partners around the world. And I think just to drive that home a little bit, I'd like to go back to the critical minerals point that General Alexander was talking about. You know, today, Secretary Bessent and Secretary Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Greer are in London meeting with the Chinese. And they're talking about a whole host of issues between our two countries, including the tariffs. But one of the top ones is rare earths, one of the classes of critical minerals, where rare earths, they're actually not that rare. You can find them in many places. But China dominates the processing. And China has instituted a system today where they have severe export controls and a licensing regime where they have greatly limited the export of these things. So this is one of the top issues. Some of you may have read this on the front pages of the Wall Street Journal recently, that the US auto sector, which uses some of these magnets that are made with the rare earth elements. To solve a really tough problem like that, where we have a critical dependency, really requires close coordination between industry and the administration. We need to figure out where are the places where these products can be found, where they can be mined, and work together to develop processing that can be independent, and so that we're not in a place where we're in a real bind like this. By the way, China has dependencies on us as well, so there's a lot for our leaders to be talking about with them. But that kind of dialogue that includes the business community, but also our friends and allies and partners, we can't go it alone, and we're wishing every luck to the secretaries and Ambassador Greer over there.
Thank you. So let me pick up on that, and Chris, go to you. You are one of the primary authors of this report, and you gave it the title. And part of the title is not just economic security, is national security, but I want everybody to focus on this. America's global economic advantage, use it or lose it. So I want you talk to a lot of businesses and a lot of folks, experts, these two among them, I believe, to get there. What do we lose if we don't use it?
Great question, Liz. Thanks for that. And before we talk about what we're going to lose, I think we need to fully understand what we have. And in the US, we have the world's most dynamic economy. We have a market that does innovation more effectively than any other market in the world. And we enter into our current period with the tailwinds many decades ago now of having won the Cold War. So we were the dominant power economically and militarily. And over time, other countries have grown stronger economically as well. And innovation and the ability to secure the resources we need from the world, the ability to maintain our seat at the table and shape the international rules-based order in a way that reflects American values and also reflects the interests of American companies, that's a muscle that atrophies over time. And so we have to always be pursuing our maximum power. And I think, when we rely on defensive economic security measures, which are necessary, but when we rely on those perhaps too exclusively, we miss out on building the deep relationships with other countries that America needs to secure its place in the world, and that the American people expect the US government to deliver to provide national security.
So let me drill down on an example, and Brian, ask you one that I think you had something to do with it, but you certainly watched it in the first Trump administration. And that's dealing with Huawei am I right? He smiles. And the race on 5G. And when the Europeans were a little too tight with it, America started with a campaign to say, oh, no, don't go there. And it was actually successful in getting the EU and the Europeans and the continent to move away. And so what I'm interested in hearing from you is how the US engages and the role of diplomacy in making sure we win. And we win and we use the tools, because one of the things that this group gathers together about is we care deeply about diplomacy and having the resources for diplomacy. We care deeply about the use of international assistance and getting in and using these tools of engagement. So we just spent a panel talking about we don't want to lose, and we don't want to lose on technology, but we don't want to lose on stability in the world. So take us back. How important is U.S. global leadership in these tools of technology, but overall?
I think the Huawei example is one where the light was blinking red, and it was a fire drill to get that to where we are today, where people did not adopt Huawei in Europe. That would have really jeopardized a lot of the open flow of information between the United States and our European partners. How do we get better at doing it when it's not a fire drill or when the light's not blinking red? I think that's where the US government might need to step back and figure out, do we need to think through what a economic/national security integrator looks like? Do we have that capability currently within the US government to be able to take what do we know is a national security challenge and partner that with the right economic solutions to be effective before it's a sprint to get to a finish line. We often joke about the ability to have a long-term vision. Some will tell you it's a 4-year vision in DC. I'll tell you it's probably like a 2-year vision. Having been around the block a few times, if you're on the same page with your strategy for 2 years, that's pretty successful. If it's 4 years, somebody's lying to you. But how do we take that next step to be more deliberate? And I think, the reset with foreign assistance gives, I think, Secretary Rubio tremendous opportunity to work with his partners, his fellow cabinet secretaries, to find ways to use the resources that are going to be available. Congress is going to continue to appropriate these funds. So if they're going to appropriate them, we should try and figure out a way to integrate that into a holistic solution. I don't think we were doing that before. I think what you had before was something that was created post-World War II, Cold War era. And to be very frank, I think a lot of people in DC may have lost sight on the granularity of what we were doing with every dollar in federal assistance. The vast majority of it was for really great purposes and still does, to some extent, achieve great things. But there was a lot of things that we could have been more tactful, could have been more strategic in how we applied that. So for me, I'm an optimistic person, and as an optimist, I think we're going to have an opportunity this summer, this fall, to kind of reset and take a look, where can we apply those resources and those opportunities on that diplomatic front to have an integrated approach to national security.
So let me ask you, John, and I might come back to you, Brian, on this one, about one of those areas where we can think about it strategically, and that's the continent of Africa. And the reason I picked that is because by 2030, half of all new young people that are entering the labor force are going to be in sub-Saharan Africa. There's going to be a need to create more than 15 million jobs every year, starting at that point. And we can know what happens there. 20 years ago, I was just reading a statistic that 20 years ago, China was the primary trading partner of about a third of countries in Africa. And today it's 97%. There's only 2 that were more of a trading partner than China. So we got some work to do there. Right now, we are, as we know, we're cutting our assistance, particularly in a continent like Africa. So there's really a question of what we're doing there. Now, the administration has said that by the fall at the UN General Assembly, that we're going to have an Africa Leader Summit. I'm interested in where the business community is on this. We have a lot of business leaders here that have been quite interested in the continent. Where do you think the business community is in thinking about these dynamics? And Brian, I'd be interested in your thoughts too, but John, why don't you kick this off?
There's huge interest in Africa from the U.S. business community, and it goes to some of the points that you're making. There's many of the fastest growing economies in the world, 1 billion consumers. You talk about the need to create millions and millions of jobs in Africa. Well, you know, you look around the world at demographic decline in countries from Italy to South Korea. That's actually an opportunity in many ways. So American companies have been flocking to Africa and investing there, trying to do business, and they're interested in Africa for those markets. One of Africa's long-term problems, though, has been market fragmentation. That it's 54 countries.
Yeah.
And you know, you take them one by one, and they each have their own customs authority and many other specific rules. And it's not always worth it for every company to go into country after country. That's why it's so exciting to see the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that doesn't include us. This is something these African countries are doing on their own to overcome that market fragmentation. Now, that's good for American business too. We at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce have an MOU with the secretariat of that agreement, and we've been weighing in on them on how to write the rules, okay? Writing the rules of the road for trade is incredibly valuable. So for instance, in the digital realm, we and many American companies have engaged there with them to try and talk about this is the best way to write those rules in a way that allows American companies to be investors and co-participants and not following not just the Chinese model, but sometimes the European model, which is often crafted in a way that discriminates against American companies too. And you've got to be there. You know, I don't know if I'm the first person today to use the old saw. We've all heard that, you know, if you're not on the menu, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And that's true in a case like this. But for American business to go there and do that effectively, it does come back to diplomacy. We need Team USA to be there, not just the business community part of it, but our diplomats, our development programs. All of that can pay big dividends. You know, targeted assistance programs that provide capacity. You know, the Europeans are there. You know, providing that kind of capacity building.
It's not just our rivals,
and so who do you
Yeah.
think winds up writing the rules more? And the Chinese are there, you know, actually building infrastructure and so on at cut rates. So we need that Team USA approach that brings together all of these tools.
Do you have any quick thoughts on Africa?
No, I think, John, you made a really good point on the regulatory framework and how do you stand that up from a trade perspective. That's going to be critical. I think also the United States needs to step back and go, we can't exploit the market for the cheap labor or the just revenue streams, but how do we have meaningful two-way trade? How do we build their infrastructure, build their workforce? And that in the older models that the people tend to look back at in the United States in the 1980s, 1990s, it was more of a capitalistic economic game for the United States and not so much worrying about what was happening in the in-country. So I think based on what I've seen in my travel, we're in a dramatically different place as a country. So yes, I do think we need to make sure that the State Department does kind of embrace that mantra and figure out ways to take what's the direction is diplomatically and marry that up with the private sector.
One of the parts of the report that's interesting, Chris, that you focused on is about where we have to reform, not retreat. You are you spent a lot of time, more than a decade, at Commerce, as well as the Export-Import Bank, so you've got some experience of seeing where reform needs to happen, but you make it clear in the report that we need to reform, not retreat. And you give some examples of that, talking about how we need to modernize our engagements, similar to what Brian is talking about, John is talking about. And one of the specifics you talk about is the need to use some of the tools like the Development Finance Corporation that Congresswoman Kim talked about, MCC, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, our U.S. Trade and Development Association. talk about some of these programs and what you would pick up on and what your other two panelists have just talked about?
Yep, that's great. I think, Liz, it really comes down to resources and mindsets. And in writing this report, we at the USGLC did a lot of interviews with companies. We did a lot of sort of deep dive conversations with government officials, with folks at other industry associations. And no one had a fatalistic view. No one thought, my gosh, America's rivals, China in particular, they are running away with this global influence game, and there's nothing that we can do as the United States of America to correct it. It's just, it's not that bad. It's really just understanding how the world has changed. Brian, I think you made the point that many of the international economic and commercial engagement federal agencies, many of them were created after World War II. Maybe the most recent one is the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which was created under President George W. Bush. So there's some, updating that could be done here. But we don't want to put down our weapons and walk away from how we engage the world in a more positive manner and create these deeper relationships. And I said that it's about resources and mindset. It's about resources because we do have to properly resource these agencies. We do have to make sure that their mission statements, their programmatic tools, their authorizations from Congress are all up to snuff for the 21st century. And then in mindset, I think it's really about helping the State Department, for instance, to understand that they need to actually win for American companies on economic and commercial issues. It's not just making sure that the Chinese don't win and some other allied country wins. I think we are in a new era where I think voters really want to see that the U.S. is really stepping it up and we're delivering. And some have criticized the Chinese for embarking on transactional diplomacy. And I'm someone who's married with 3 kids, and I feel like every day is multiple negotiations. And you can create a lot of relationships that way. And I think our foreign partners, other countries, or emerging markets that want to see the U.S. show up and be more present as a resource for them, they want to see the U.S. having a let's win it strategy to really engage them.
I was just going to say the 2 agencies you just mentioned, the Export-Import Bank of the United States and the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, their reauthorizations are coming up. So we absolutely need to get those back and fully funded, and because all of our competitors out in the international marketplace, they have those
So that's
tools.
a great point. So let's stick on this how America wins, and our last round, my last quick round of questions, is how America wins is we've got to get the Development Finance Corporation and the export-import, these tools that are so important to get reauthorized and to get resourced properly. So Brian, one of the themes of all of these programs is there's a synergy of private sector with the public sector that really work. And I know that's really important to this administration, is this new it's not new, but an enhanced model of the private sector and and government really working together. So I'm interested in how we see this as kind of a force multiplier, how you're seeing it, how the administration is seeing it. I'm intrigued because one of the things that the president ran on and is pursuing in his foreign policy is we don't want any more costly wars. These have been important tools to stabilize the world, to deliver on that promise. How do we make sure we have these tools, we have the capacity of people that can run these programs, and we have the resources?
It's a great question, Liz. I think the really important thing here is understanding that this president, his leadership style is a top-down approach, and he likes to have a firm understanding.
So what did he tell you today when you met with him in the Oval Office?
Not yet. I think he was still on his way back before I left. one of the things you're seeing happen right now is kind of this reset where over the last several decades, the bureaucratic level of government had a lot of say in what the administration was or wasn't going to do. It was indifferent to political bias. It wasn't a Democrat-Republican thing. It had just become so large and so much decision authority had been delegated to different parts of the government that you would go back to the thing I said at the very onset, where you have a 2-year strategy, you're lucky to see it go 2 years. I think the president here has kind of created over the last several months this streamlined vision of, I'm going to set the policy tone, I want clear direction, I want to see the performance measures occur, and then kind of streamlined that down. The NSC went from being a think tank body where you could see a difference of opinions bubbling up from the staff coming up to kind of you have a basis of understanding what the legal limits of the authorities are for the agencies, and how do I implement the vision I'm getting from the top into the organization. I think you're going to see a much more agile State Department on the other side of this coin. I think you're going to see a much more agile, when you look at Millennium Challenge Corporation, you look at IDFC, there's going to be an opportunity here for everyone to be much more agile and responsive to the decisions that are taking place between world leaders, as opposed to going to a G7, G8, G20, having a lot of conversation, and you'll be lucky in 2 years to see anything actually come out of it. So I think what we're witnessing is this pivot away from this slow diplomatic process of talking things out to, let's get the framework of an agreement and let's go get execution done.
Like Syria.
Yes.
Decision made, sanctions done.
Yep. I think that's where you're going to see it head.
Okay, we'll hear more, I'm sure, about that in our next panel. John, you've already mentioned setting the rules of the road. How important is it for America to show up as opposed to pull out even when we need to reform? There's lots of multilateral places to sit. How much does the business community care?
Well, it's indispensable. There's 40 million American jobs that depend on trade. 95% of the people that we want to sell something to live outside our borders. And so it's important to see the work go forward that the USTR is the tip of the spear in opening up foreign markets, and that's out there. But American diplomats and State Department and our development programs are also very important adjuncts to that process. Our prosperity depends on it. So your question about being at the table, it's, the world is moving ahead on trade. I think since the turn of the century, more than 400 bilateral and plurilateral, that is multi-country trade agreements have been negotiated. The United States hasn't entered into a full-fledged new trade agreement in about 12 years. And so that means others are out there trading amongst themselves, and they're always going to find ways to find the path of least resistance and the path of most sales amongst themselves. So America needs to be there with our diplomacy and development and our trade negotiators to make sure that American companies are participating in that as well.
Chris, give us a headline. What's the next step for the Global Economic Hub?
We want to receive feedback from all of you and other businesses. John and Brian, we want to receive feedback from you guys too. USGLC also does a great job of doing events like this around the country, and so we'd like this to be sort of a nationwide process to solicit input. And then I think we want to do further work and some deeper dives on solutions. How can we really lock it in with the intelligence community, with the State Department, with everyone in government, that economic security is national security? How can we, as an association and member companies, how can we help to shape a lot of these federal agencies to better address the 21st century threats that the U.S. faces? So I think
great.
I got to talk to you a bit too, Liz.
Okay,
we'll figure out what we're going to do.
So in our last minute, let's close with maybe one story. You've all traveled all over the world. One 30-second soundbite of where you saw America show up, ideally with some of our diplomacy or international assistance program, where you said, I'm really proud.
Me down here, I would say, the report has a few examples of this, but another example we didn't mention in the report is AUKUS, Australia, UK, US partnership. which it's not just about nuclear submarines. It's also about the Pillar 2 enhancing dominance in AI and cybersecurity and advanced tech. So I think that's an example of where economic security is fully integrated with national security.
John?
I think of Colombia. You know, you look back 25, 30 years, Colombia was a very troubled place. There was a president of that country who was, he was put on one of these lists for ties to narco trafficking. You know, but the United States invested in that relationship. We provided security assistance, we provided development assistance, and over the years, that Colombia was able, you know, through the hard work, principally of Colombians, but with help from the United States, to get to a point where then we negotiated a market opening trade agreement. And there's been incredible human progress. If you just look at the quality of life of Colombians and income levels, it's a country that still has its issues, but it really shows how we can succeed when we bring together all of the tools of economic statecraft.
Brian?
I think for me, it's most Taiwan. I was in Taiwan last year and was very impressed by the private sector engagement on software and a few pieces of hardware that were not really being driven in a public way by the US government, but there were some quiet behind the scenes conversations that I think really have brought Taiwan a long way over the last 18 months in terms of how they're prepared to defend themselves.
Well, I'm sure each of you have your stories, and I want you to think about them as we head into the next session where we're going to unravel and unpack some of the challenges in the world. So think about these positive stories, and please join me in thanking Chris, John, and Brian for their wonderful work and the things they do. Thank you. And our next session is going to begin, and please join me in welcoming Ambassador Carl Hoffman, President of HealthX Partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz.
You're so wonderful. Thank you for doing this.
Great to see you.
Thank you. Mwah.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Carl, all yours. I can get on.
Much, Liz, and fascinating conversation so far, and there's more to come. As Liz said, I'm Carl Hoffman. I'm the CEO of HealthX Partners, and I'm also privileged to be the vice chair of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. And before I introduce this next panel, just a couple of comments. I remember when I was a younger Foreign Service officer 30 years ago, when U.S. Global Leadership Coalition was being established. And that was a moment when the U.S. was tempted. The U.S. was tempted back in 1995 to disengage from the world. And it's because of USGLC and other organizations like it and people like you in this room that the U.S. averted that big mistake. I tend to think that the U.S. is fated to lead. It is our role in the world to lead. We have been gifted this responsibility to lead. The question is not whether the U.S. leads. The question is, in which direction does the United States lead? And that question is very much up for discussion and debate right now. And I just want to say to all of you in particular who are participating in the events tomorrow on Capitol Hill, your presence is so important, and the message that you convey, representing yourself and the people from whatever town, city, state you're coming from, that message resonates on Capitol Hill, and it counts more than ever right now. So I want to thank you for your presence. So we're going to talk in this next panel about how does America win, and we have a fantastic group of people. I have to say that in your program, unfortunately, one of the participants in this panel wasn't able to be here today. She's not feeling well, but that's my friend and colleague, Carrie Hessler-Radlett, former director of the Peace Corps, fellow CEO of mine of an organization called Global Communities. I know she regrets not being here. But this panel does include some other great folks, friends, and leaders. Ambassador Mark Green, who was the first Trump administration's administrator for the U.S. Agency for International Development, former president of the Wilson Center, and four-term congressman from the state of Wisconsin, And I did first meet him back in 2007, 2008, when he was President George W. Bush's ambassador to the Republic of Tanzania. We also have Sean Callahan, who, fellow CEO, the leader of Catholic Relief Services. You've all heard of CRS. It's the international humanitarian agency of the Catholic community here in the United States and a global leader on humanitarian issues. And Sean has decades of experience within CRS that he'll be able to bring to this panel conversation today. And Josh Rogan. Josh Rogan is the lead security analyst for WP Intelligence and the Washington Post, the author of Chaos Under Heaven, Trump, Xi, and the Battle for the 21st Century. So we've been hearing about some of that already today. For nearly a decade, Josh's global opinions columns have broken news and provided insights about all the events important in the world. And everybody in this town knows and reads Josh Rogan. And Josh Rogan's words are bound to influence what you're reading in every one of your hometowns too. So we're privileged to have this great panel today. And they will be led by Jason Gross. Jason, who I think was USGLC's first full-time employee back in 2001, something like that, then went on to have a career of leadership on Capitol Hill, and he's now, we're delighted to say, back at USGLC as the executive director of USGLC. So please join me in welcoming this terrific panel.
Thank you, Carl. Good to see everyone today. Good afternoon. Good to see so many familiar faces and a lot of new ones as well today. But an exciting day, really important conversation we have coming up right now. As you've been hearing, we're at an important, critical moment for not only U.S. leadership in the world, but also the future of America's international assistance programs. From historic humanitarian crises currently transpiring to rising global competition with our adversaries and our rivals, the stakes are enormously high today. But so is the opportunity for smart, focused, and strategic engagement by America. Today's closing plenary asks, how does America win in the world? We're joined by a uniquely experienced panel to explore the tools, the threats, and the opportunities for America on the global stage right now. As Ambassador Hoffman mentioned, we're missing our dear friend Carrie Hessler-Radlett as well today, the 19th director of the Peace Corps, but we're going to channel her energy and the energy of those Peace Corps volunteers in our audience today, those watching us on live stream across the country and on C-SPAN, to inform our discussion as well. So let's dive in and talk about how, when America leads, America wins on the global stage. I'll return to my left to Mark Green first. As you heard in the introduction, a former member of Congress representing the 8th District of Wisconsin, former U.S. Ambassador to Tanzania, former administrator of the USAID in the first Trump administration. No one comes to the stage with greater experience in both overseeing our international assistance programs and in implementing them. Your time as USAID administrator, you oversaw our responses to crises around the world, and that informs some of the crises we have today. We look at in Ukraine, Democratic Republic of Congo, growing China's influence in Latin America and in Africa. So kick us off in this discussion, Ambassador Green. Where are the most critical needs for U.S. international assistance today in this ever-shifting global landscape?
I guess what I'll do is I'm going to duck the specifics in terms of countries and issues and step back a little bit, because I think it's a few broad themes that are pressing and critical right now. Number one, the most important thing to remember as we talk about the future of foreign assistance and development is to have a clear understanding on how we actually do that. When I was at USAID, I used to walk around to irritate people and say, hey, look, just so we're clear, we don't actually do development in this building. In fact, we don't do development in Washington, D.C. We do development out there. And so I think the most pressing issue is how do we actually rebuild the connective tissue, the software that matters in terms of our presence around the world. With the dismantling of USAID, about 5,000 Foreign Service nationals were moved aside. And the question becomes, since some of them are starting to be hired by other powers in the world, how do we have that network that actually helps us to identify the opportunities and to connect us with the rest of the world? Number two, I think it's clarity of vision on what we want to see. I just came back from Colombia, and John was talking about Colombia. I was just in Colombia last week. And what I heard from all of those assembled, there were business persons from around the country and around the region, over and over again, they were asking me, what is it that you guys want? What does success look like? What is it that you want to see from our partners, both public and private, around the world? And so I think that's awfully important, being clear on what it is that we want to see. And I think the third piece to it is to be clear that the issues of development and foreign assistance are not about the acronyms, not about the boxes and where they are on the chart. Those are hardware issues. Foreign assistance and American leadership, those are software issues. And so how do we pull together all of the various tools of power that we have? So much of it is private sector. That's the real power, entrepreneurship. How do you pull that together and mobilize it in ways that send signals around the world and advance things? And I guess the final thing I'll say is a nugget of optimism. One of the things that I think we see in President Trump is someone who's impatient. And so when President Trump sees a challenge, sees a problem, he'll move heaven and earth to get there. And so I think we should feel confident and hopeful that as we talk about these issues and they're identified, hopefully we can mobilize those tools to reaffirm leadership.
Thank you. Sean, I want to take that determination of mobilizing our leverage, our tools, in a specific area that you have great expertise in. President and CEO, Catholic Relief Services, in over 100 countries delivering humanitarian assistance, and knowing very well, just returned from a trip to Zambia actually, and seeing how food insecurity across the globe can destabilize communities, countries, and even entire regions. So if we look at some of the most urgent food security flashpoints right now around the world, certainly Sudan comes to mind as one. What are the stakes there for not only for children and families in those regions, but also the effects of destabilization that food insecurity can produce that eventually have implications for our national security? Sean.
Thanks, Jason. As we look at these different situations around the world, you take Sudan, you take Ethiopia, Madagascar, and then now many of the countries in the dry corridor in Central America where we had McGovern Dole programs and things that were helping families have their children at least have one meal a day. And we heard from the General Richardson earlier that one of the key things is consistency. So consistency certainly is one thing. The other thing is values. When you want to go to different countries and build relationships, and as the ambassador said, connective tissue, it's about who we are as Americans. Do they trust us or do they trust someone else? So trust is the key word, and quite frankly, we've benefited that China does not have that trust. They've invested there, but they don't have the trust because they weren't there when people needed them. So if we're not there when someone needs to be fed, does that family then start moving on and migrating? Do they go to a different place, which adds to instability? If they're in an area of the world where there aren't any other options, do they join extremist groups because they don't have other opportunities? They don't have the economic livelihoods so that they can support their families. And then lastly, do we have a famine? Do we have more and more deaths on our hands, which is what we don't want as a country, because we're the people, as we heard on the earlier panel, that have those values that raise it up. So Right now, we have the trust of various countries. We've invested in that trust over the years. It'd be a shame if we don't use all the tools that we have, if we don't use that trust to help America move forward, but also help those countries move forward. And if they trust us, they will come along with us into the future.
Thank you, Sean. Josh, you covered national security issues in your career, great power competition with America's rivals like China, Iran, and Russia. Last week in Singapore, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that the threat China poses is real and it could be imminent, while reinforcing the strength of America's allies in the Indo-Pacific. How do you see China's role? We've heard a lot about it already today. We're going to talk about it some more right now. How do you see China's role evolving in terms of challenging U.S. influence around the world? And how do you see the key strategic role of our civilian tools, capabilities, in terms of pushing back against China's growing influence?
Sure. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me. I've been benefiting from your expertise and from the fine work that you do as a reporter for the last 20 years. So it's really a personal honor for me to be here on stage addressing you all today, and I have a real respect and appreciation for everything that you guys are doing. What I've seen in the past months leading up to Secretary Hegseth's remark is a wholesale withdrawal of U.S. government support and trust and involvement and attention, not just across that region, but across the world, that has redounded to China's benefit in a number of really important and significant ways. Not just the cutting of USAID, but also the cutting of vital health services, HIV support all over the world, and infrastructure, and democracy building, human rights advocacy, what Ronald Reagan would call the arsenal of democracy, the National Endowment for Democracy, organizations like the Wilson Center, and an overall sort of sudden and shocking cutoff of vital food and medicine aid to millions of people in need all over the world. Now, that has been coupled with a complete slashing of U.S. Agency for Global Media, which was the organization that helped spread real information and real news to counter Chinese propaganda in most of the world. And all of this convinces, in my reporting, all of these countries to reluctantly conclude that China actually is the more reliable partner right now, and to question all of the projects that may still remain with their U.S. partners. We talked about the Millennium Challenge Corporation in the last panel. According to the New York Times, if you trust their reporting, the administration is in the process of dismantling that organization right now. Everyone's going to get fired except for a few people, and projects all over the world are in limbo. You have a Nepali project for, a couple $100 million to build roads and infrastructure and transmission lines that they agreed to work on with us because at the cost of angering their Chinese interlocutors who are more heavily involved. They took a bet on us, and we just made them realize that that was a bad bet. And there are stories like that all over the world. So yes, the threat from China to our interests and values is real and imminent. I think Secretary Hegseth is right as far as that goes, but it's impossible for me to not notice that all of the administration's policies are driving our allies and our partners directly into Beijing's hands. And of course, the Chinese Communist Party is taking advantage of that at every turn by redoubling its efforts in those places where America is withdrawing, and then using its massive propaganda machine to reinforce the idea around the world, the true idea around the world, by the way, that the United States can no longer be trusted to do what it says and say what it does. And when you think about the massive amounts of work that it would take to rebuild all of that trust and rebuild all of that aid and agency, if we decided to do it now, even though we're not doing it now, you can see that we're losing a generation of leaders in Asia, young leaders in Africa, in Latin America, and here at home, because if you were any one of those leaders, why would you sign up to work with us at this moment rather than the Chinese? You wouldn't. And if you were wanting to work on behalf of the United States, you would have a harder case to make that that's a reliable career path to go in as a young person. All of that's to say that the work that you guys in this room are doing, especially this week, but not only this week, especially back in your community, is more important than it has ever been, and more needed than it has ever been, more urgent than it has ever been. But if you're asking me how the U.S.-China competition is shaping up, not well at this moment, and most of that is on us.
Some affirmation from the crowd there, Josh, from what you said.
It's the simple truth.
Ambassador Green, half a world away from Nepal is Ukraine, where you were last year seeing firsthand the devastation from Russia's invasion of that country. Tell us, do you see hope for an equitable peace deal in the near future? And what role do you hope the U.S. and NATO can play in the path forward for Ukraine after this conflict ends?
Well, and in the previous panel, or 2 panels ago, someone made reference to it. I think it's true. President Trump doesn't like war. It's very clear. And is looking for ways to settle conflicts, to solve conflicts, and to prevent conflicts. And that's good news. I think when we look at Ukraine, we see a country and a people that are remarkably resilient, extraordinarily courageous, and I think amazingly entrepreneurial. We have to remind ourselves of the size of the Russian economy when it started, the resources that they had, the size of their military, and yet, unlike Vladimir Putin's fondest desires, it did not roll over in 72 hours. Instead, we're seeing a people battle back for their freedom and their future. Those are people that we want to partner with. I think we're also seeing, with what's happening in Ukraine, a shift in how the world takes a look at warfare and conflict. We are seeing, for example, the remarkable innovations in drone warfare that is changing the very nature of how conflicts are conducted. I'm going to bring that back to Africa. That's one of the things that I often remind people of. Africa is the youngest continent in the world. And when you look at places like Nigeria, young, vibrant, aspirational, entrepreneurial, doing things with frugal technology that put us to shame, we want to partner with them. We want to harness that spirit, that aspiration. It makes us stronger. It makes them stronger. To me, that's the future. And so I think as President Trump takes a look at this unsettled world, I hope and believe he'll look at places like the young, vibrant populations that are emerging in parts of the world and say, look, they are naturally pro-US. They're naturally pro-West. Let's partner with them. Let's channel investment to create new opportunities there, which will create new opportunities here. So I think there are some threads that should make us hopeful and should make us optimistic, even at a time that is clearly unsettled and in too many places violent.
Certainly. And that other link that you bring up between Ukraine and Africa, of course, is one that our leaders from our heartland have been making in meetings with the members of Congress, our Farmers for Prosperity group as well, about that breadbasket of the world at Ukraine, that we have that understanding that goes back to Sean's work on food security, of how vital that breadbasket is for Africa's future and stability as well, for food security, that ties some of these disparate issues together. Josh, I want to go to Africa too for you. Your outlet, the Washington Post, recently reported on the fallout from U.S. withdrawal from Somalia, where assistance cuts have hurt our counterterrorism efforts, operations against al-Shabaab, which of course is an al-Qaeda-linked insurgency group. African Union troops haven't been paid since January due to cuts in U.S. aid, increasing risks for American troops. And of course, since February, al-Shabaab has retaken dozens of villages and reclaimed nearly a third of lost territory. What are the ripple effects for this kind of U.S. disengagement on security dynamics in Africa and abroad, for our national security, for a relation with our allies, and other dynamics?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think there's the obvious effects that instability abroad will reduce our security at home. That's been a core tenet of this group and its work all of these years. But I think there are a few things that people aren't calculating that can also add to the argument. The biggest growing presence in that part of the world right now is Russia. It's the Wagner Group. They're militarizing and joining forces with these governments who, in some cases, are corrupt and in some cases just will take the security option that's offered to them. And, you know, it's bizarre that in 2025 that Russia would be seen as a more reliable security partner in many parts of the world than the United States, but here we are. And, you know, if you want to look at the soft power side of it, well, that's a disaster too, because we're removing all of our soft power and humanitarian and aid assistance too. So, you know, we can make the argument that we need hard power and soft power, but there's very little we can do with neither. And, you know, I think one of the maybe upsides is that when you go to your Capitol Hill meetings, there are certain things that you can appeal to even Republican congressmen who are skeptical about aid. One of them is China, and it's always, you know, useful to focus on the fact that we're in a strategic competition with China. The other is terrorism. And terrorism is at least still, as far as I know, something that most Republican congressmen still want to fight. So we should emphasize that this is the place where it's, you know, coming from, and that our withdrawal exacerbates that threat. But in terms of broader commitment to having an enduring presence in Somalia, no, I don't think that's on the table, at least for the next few years. So I think it's important to be targeted in our asks of this administration and lawmakers. I think it's important to be focused on different parts of the electorate and what are their local interests as well as their national interests, for example, with the farmers. But, you know, I would be lying if I said it looked good. In the the African Development Bank, that's what had been a key outlet for the United States to prove to countries like Somalia that we cared about them more than insofar as we wanted to protect ourselves from terrorism. That's another example of the Trump administration, an organization the Trump administration is currently gutting. So, I mean, the consequences are both short-term in terms of our security, long-term in terms of our stability. The arguments are the same. They're not drastically different than they were a year ago. They can be tailored, they can be specified, they can be sort of updated, but in essence, our interests and our values are the same, should be the same as they were in the past, and that applies to Somalia, as it applies to Nepal, as it applies to Ukraine, as it should apply to the United States.
Thanks, Josh. Liz mentioned before our recently released Blueprint for America to Win in the World, USGLC released, set of 10 key recommendations for the administration and Congress on how to move the international reform agenda forward. Let me throw it over to you, Sean, to talk, to kind of build on. Josh has made some points about some key programs, efforts, ideas that are worth preserving, reforming, and making sure they work. I want to talk to you about some as well from your expertise. Talk about what is working in terms of global health, food assistance, right? PEPFAR, Gavi, the Global Fund. On the food side, McGovern-Dole, Food for Peace, Feed the Future for capacity. You were seeing these, your colleagues at CRS see these on the ground already. What is working? What do we need to improve to make sure that it's still delivering for the U.S.? And what do we need to make sure that we're investing in going forward?
Great question. You know, I think many of us, when we sit in this room and we hear the debate going on about international humanitarian assistance, we figure that no one has tried to reform it before. And it's, you know, the laughs, you know, get it. It's simply not true. So when PEPFAR came into place, it was a revolutionary new program that came out there. And we happen to be one of the organizations that started out with PEPFAR 22 years ago. And what PEPFAR ended up doing was getting the local governments and local people involved. So you need the local government, you need the local community, you need local business, and then you have the infusion of resources that all come together to make it happen. You also need one other important ingredient that I mentioned before, and that's trust. People do not change their behavior if they don't trust you who are implementing the program on the ground. You have to be there with them, you have to be consistent, and you can't be out for yourself, you have to be out for the people there, and they have to believe you on the ground. And we in this room succeeded. People trusted us, and so now these people, have reached out and said, we're going to do it. We're not going to create drug-resistant C because we're going to be faithful to our treatment. And that's why we have saved over 25 million lives with PEPFAR. With the Global Fund, we're providing HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria responses in all the countries throughout the world. You might be surprised, Catholic Relief Services, working in Niger, we covered 21 million people with mosquito nets in a country that has about 15 million Catholics. But we work together with the local communities, with the local government, and the local businesses to make these things happen. These have all been successes. But it needs those elements that we do. Again, the values that we bring, the trust that we bring, the consistency that the General mentioned earlier, but also the inclusion of that local community so that they can make it happen, the local government so they can build on it. And then the other key element is when the local government is there, and I just came back last night from Zambia, we went out and we're doing early childhood development, and we had the community there. So we had government officials, we had traditional birth attendants, we had nurses, we had doctors. And by the way, the doctors, the nurses, and the birth attendants were all women who were trained up in these communities in Zambia to reach out to those local communities. They all came together as a community, and they had a women's group and a men's group. This was a whole of community effort. So it isn't as if the US parachutes, food or assistance and medicines out there. It's we work with the communities, help them build that resiliency, and then helps them move forward. And so it's not about us, it's about them and what they can do, and then that helps them prepare themselves for the future.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sean, for your work. So much impact to discuss, so little time overall. Before we go to our last question, I want to throw it back to Mark for one retrospective one, and that is, we're talking about in the blueprint about the importance of burden sharing, of self-reliance. You were the launcher of the journey for self-reliance at USAID from your first day there as a mantra of how you led the agency. On your retrospective right now, how did that work when you were there? How do we need to get back to there in terms of our goals right now for the future of international assistance and maintaining, as you talked about, that expertise, the passion, the personnel, the programs of USAID that you had there in some other form if it needs to be in the future, but to get to that ethos of what we've had when you were leading USAID?
So we talked about the journey to self-reliance for two reasons. Number one, it was a unifying theme that everybody in the spectrum who gets involved in development and foreign assistance could get behind. Number two, I happen to believe in it. And the time that I've spent in Africa, I began as a teacher in a village in western Kenya. I was struck by how what my young Kenyan students wanted was precisely what my kids wanted, what I want, what you want, and that is a chance. Nothing more than a chance, an opportunity. And so tapping into that, and quite frankly, in a time when we have a Secretary of State who is competitive and wants to see America succeed, right. It is unifying around that vision. It is helping countries in the world and their young people unleashing their entrepreneurial spirit, their innovations, their creativity. That's really how we win the global competition. We win because we tap into those values that unify people here, unify us all as Americans, and make sure that we recognize it isn't the American dream, it's the universal dream. And so tapping into that and making sure that's at the heart of our programs, that we're not talking about simply, providing stuff and handing things over, but unleashing that, I think, around the world is the vision for success, and it's one that this administration, I know, supports and can get behind.
Such a great conversation. Wish it could go longer, but all great things must come to an end. So let's go to our closing question right now. You have folks, as you know, in this audience, they've flown, they've driven from around the country to go meet with their members of Congress tomorrow for vital conversations at this key time. Give us one takeaway that you'd love for them to deliver to Capitol Hill tomorrow of the most important reason right now why we need to reform but not retreat, to move forward still with our international assistance programs. I'm going to go to Sean first, then Josh, and close with the ambassador.
I guess the first thing I'd just say is your voice is critically important, and so I'm so happy that you're going out there. A couple weeks ago, I was on the Hill meeting with senators and congresspeople, and I said, what can we do more? And they said, come and talk to people. There's a lot of noise out there. People are looking for the truth. And you won't be surprised, I would push the values as a country. We need to be true to our word. We need to stick to what we say we're going to do, and we need to do what we say we're going to do. And so getting to that to your Congress people and let them know that it's crucially important for us as a country to be respected. If we go out there and people no longer trust us, it puts us in a defensive position.
Thank you, Sean. Well deserved, yes.
Thank you. I think a lot of the advice you'll get this week will be something like, frame your moral and strategic arguments in terms of national interest to appeal to the Trump idea of what all of this programmatic should be aimed towards. In other words, to pretend that it's really not about helping people, but that it's about helping the administration or its parochial interest or its commercial interest or its transactional interests. I'm not saying don't do that. I think that can have a benefit. I've seen it work. I think Syria is a good example. You can convince this administration to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. But don't abandon that moral and strategic argument at the same time. Make that argument as well. Don't let it slip by. Don't buy into the frame that this is just about us or just about money or just about making Trump look good. Because that's a moral and strategic imperative that will last long beyond the Trump administration. And my last thing is, don't confine your advocacy to Washington, because one of the problems that led us into this situation is that we had this idea that there's no domestic constituency for foreign aid, and that's wrong. You're proof of that. Everyone in this room is proof of that. And the forces of isolationism and retrenchment and cruelty are loud on social media, but not deep, okay? And we need to re-engage the American public to convince them that this is not criminal activity, that this is, not just in our national interest, but also the right thing to do. So please engage your communities, as I know you're already doing. Double down on that, because eventually, although people will say this is a top-down system, the truth is that it does respond to what comes from the bottom up, from the people. And you guys are the front line. You're the army for that message. And thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you, Josh. To close to you, Ambassador, Josh talked about this army being deployed tomorrow to go out to Capitol Hill. You have received those meetings in the past?
I've been on all ends of it.
And you've asked Congress for help after that? You've seen all angles of this? What's your closing advice to these great folks tomorrow?
So I think the message, don't get caught up in any one thing, any one acronym, any one program. Instead, to me, this is a real simple truth. There are lots of debates out there. There are lots of issues out there. What we know for sure is that the world doesn't get better if America steps back. Of that, we are very, very sure. Republicans and Democrats alike believe in that vision, remind them of that. That's what really matters. Is America engaged in the world, or are we going to step back and let the world happen to us? To me, that's the choice.
Right on. Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists for an outstanding conversation and their time and expertise. We're going to turn it over to my colleagues, Ariana Rex, Rachel Huffman, Parker Novak, to equip all of you for your visits tomorrow on the Hill, that much wiser and hopefully more effective after the great expertise from there. Thank you again for a great conversation.